Welcome to the Soul Script podcast. Here we explore how to unlock the power of our story. Our journey here on earth can be one of deep passion, intentional creation, and personal transformation. The only thing holding us back is our stories. Come and join me as we rewrite and reignite. Welcome to the Soul Script podcast. I am your host, Laura Titanser, and today we are going to be talking about how to read your human design chart, at least the basics of it, so that when you look at your chart, you can somewhat understand what it is you're seeing. Now, I already talked about human design in a previous episode. We did maybe hit just a few teeny tiny basics of your chart, but mostly what I talked about was why I love human design personally, how it's influenced my personal life and the way that I go about doing life. Honestly, learning about my human design chart has systematically changed me and for the better, right? So I share that with you, learning what my energy type is. My energy type is a projector. I will go into that in this episode, so don't worry about, well, what is a projector? That's fine. We're going to go into all the different types, but that's what you can find in that episode. This episode is about more detail on reading your own chart. So before we get started, the very first thing that you're going to want to do is go to soulscriptstudio.com. On the very home page, there is a submission form. You can fill out your information in there, press go, and what will come up is your chart. And you can also choose to download a PDF of your chart, which I would highly recommend. Obviously, you can come back to this website and enter in your information as many times as you want and still receive the chart, but download your PDF. And one cool thing about downloading your PDF and looking at this chart on my website is that what will accompany it is a completely free little explanation of each component of your chart. Now, it doesn't explain to you, okay, this is this center and that's what that means. It's just talking about your gates and your channels and the different aspects of your human design and just giving you a tiny explanation as to what that specific one is. Okay, that probably is really confusing. We're going to talk about that, but just go and download your chart. Have it in front of you before we go into this episode, or you're going to be so confused as to what it is that I'm talking about. I will do my very, very best at explaining this chart, which is very visual, without you being able to visually see it. Now, I love human design. I've grown to love human design, although I am a fairly recent converter to human design, mostly because I've been very anti astrology, anything that has to do with you were born at this certain time and place, and that affects your whole personality and how it works. Well, I have a lot of friends who have exposed me to human design and astrology. And honestly, astrology still just is so confusing to me. And human design works with aspects of astrology, but I feel like it does it in a way that you can digest the information a little better. So going back to this, I was not a believer, I guess I would say. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't know how it all works. I am flabbergasted by it. I'm confused by it. But what I do know is that as I have experimented with it, just like dipped my toe in here and dipped my toe in there, and just saw it in my own life, had examples of it in my own life, I look at it and I'm like, how does this work? I have no idea. Does it work? Absolutely. Can it help people? Totally. Has it already helped me? Yes, it absolutely has. And that is why I kind of just poured my whole heart and soul into learning more about human design, and why I now use it as part of my one-on-one coaching with clients. Using human design gives us this amazing springboard to actually really pinpoint and identify what it is that you want to work on in our one-on-one coaching sessions. That's what human design does so well, is it gives us this visualization of things that are happening either within us or energetically around us or by those that we are near. And I don't know about you, but I'm definitely a visual learner. And so having this chart in front of me to kind of help me understand how I tick is very, very helpful. The other thing that it is so helpful with and has been a huge blessing in my life is that it has almost given me permission to be how I am designed. So there have been many instances, and I go into more detail about this in the previous episode, where I thought I had to look, function, and act in a certain way. And looking at my human design chart, it tells me, hey, that's actually not the best way for you to look, function, and act. And so I gave myself permission to be able to follow this human design chart for myself. And ever since I have, it's been incredibly freeing. And now I function in a way better way than I ever did before. So this is kind of the liberation that it gives to my clients. And then we can see where their conditioning is and how we can help them decondition themselves to be able to give themselves permission to live authentically to themselves. All right, so deep breath. Let's get started. We're going to talk about the energy centers. So you have 9 different energy centers, and each of those energy centers are the shapes that are found on what is called your body graph. So if you went to my website and you printed that off or downloaded the PDF, you'll see triangles, you'll see squares, and one of them is a heart shape. Now, if you go to a different website and you receive your chart from a different system and their shapes are different than the ones that you see on my chart, that is okay. They are all representative of the same 9 energy centers. And so it does not matter the shape of them. It also does not matter the coloration of them. Likely in your chart, you will have what we call an open center, which is a center that has no color in it whatsoever. It's just left white or maybe tan or whatever it might be. And then you'll also have some energy centers, or you'll likely have some energy centers that are colored in, and we call those defined energy centers. But once again, when it comes to the centers, it does not matter what color they are. It just matters, are they colored in or are they not colored in? Now, if you've downloaded your chart and you're looking at it and you say, none of my energy centers are colored in or defined, that means that you are a reflector, okay? So sometimes there are some people, there's like 2% of the population that are reflectors, and they will not have any of their energy centers defined. So if you're a reflector, you may have none of your centers defined, or I guess you will have none of your centers defined. And then sometimes there are types out there who have every single center defined. So it's okay if you don't have any defined. It's okay if you don't have any undefined. That doesn't matter. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. And that's also one thing I want to clarify with human design in general, this whole system, is that there is no good and there is no bad, there just is. And sometimes there's a higher vibrational expression of a component of your chart, and sometimes there's a lower vibrational expression of a component of your chart. But I think it's really important to not place judgment on what we see within our chart, because it is not good nor bad. And sometimes we get this idea in our head that we're not as strong depending on which energy type we are or how many energy centers we have defined or not. Put that all away. There's nothing good or bad about it. Your chart is perfect. You are perfectly designed how you are meant to be designed. Looking at your chart, you can see your 9 energy centers. They are either colored in or not colored in, and those are the shapes that are on your body graph. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, each energy center, each one of those shapes kind of represents or symbolizes a different aspect of your energy or of your system. So the very top one, which is usually a triangle, is your head. The next one down is your ajna. The next one down is your throat. Under your throat, we have the G center. Under your G center, we have the sacral center. Under the sacral, we have the root. To the right of the root is your solar plexus. And then if we move up just a little bit from the solar plexus, we have our heart. And then to the left of the sacral and root center, we have our spleen. So those are the different names of the centers. Now, each center has a different energy and a different purpose. So let's talk about the head first. The head, I think about it in this way, and honestly, there are a lot of different ways to decipher, discern, a lot of different perspectives on all of this information. So whoever you are talking to, whatever practitioner or friend or whatever, they're going to have their own little flavor to these. So as you're listening, make sure that you're tuning into your own intuition and your own discernment to figure out, is this true? Is it true for me? Is this just from somebody's perspective, right? Take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. Before we go any further into this, another thing I always talk about with my clients is that if something isn't sitting right with you when you're talking about your chart, it maybe is because there's a flaw in the system. Like, I'm not going to say that there isn't. And like I said, there's different perspectives of each aspect of the chart depending on who it is you're talking to. So if it's not sitting right with you, it could be that the definition or the perspective of the teacher could be a little bit off. But I am willing to bet that what it really is that is an area where you are actually not living in alignment with your design, because we experience conditioning. Because everybody around us, really, our parents are probably a different design than we are. I mean, I know they're a different design than we are, but they might, be a different energy type than you are. And the way that they function is different than the way that you should function. And so we have conditioning from well-meaning people or people who misunderstand us or hurt people, right? We get bombarded by all of their ideals. We get conditioned. And so every single one of us has a certain amount of conditioning that is part of this. And so when we're going through this and you feel a little off about something, I want you to just take note of it. Now, I won't be able to look at your chart personally and talk to you about what this means for you and kind of dig into it. And that's honestly the benefit of doing a one-on-one session, because even if you can at least begin to understand what you're looking at with your chart, it is helpful to have somebody to help you process through what it is that you're seeing and notice, oh, that makes me feel yucky. Why does it make me feel yucky? Is there conditioning there? And what beliefs can we go in and rewrite so that you can live more in alignment to who you are? But even though we can't sit together one-on-one in the middle of this podcast, you at least can have your chart in front of you. You can take note of those things that make you feel a little off or uncomfortable, write them down, and then you can go and journal and ask yourself questions, get curious about those things and why it is that they made you feel uncomfortable. All right, now where were we? We were talking about our centers. We were talking about the head. Oh, and then I was telling you that there are different perspectives from different people, and this is how I interpret the head or all of the energy centers. So in my mind, to just give you a little bit of a visual, the head has to do with the ideas that are floating around our head, right? It's kind of like it's conceptualizing. It's an idea that isn't actionable yet. It is when you're sitting in a room and people are brainstorming and just coming up with an idea like, oh, what if we did this? Oh, wouldn't that be fun? Let's do this. And it's nothing that's just solid. You haven't formed an opinion about it. It's just an idea at that point. That is what the head is. Now, if we move it down to the ajna, let's say we take one of those ideas and we start considering it, and we start forming opinions about it, and we start deciding whether we want to actually, take action on it. That's what happens in the ajna, okay? So ideas from the head settle and start taking form there. Below the ajna, if you remember, is the throat. So usually that is a square. Your ajna is like an upside down triangle. Your throat is a square. And just side note, I do have a little cheat sheet on these centers, actually on my website, same one, soulscriptstudio.com, and you can go to resources. The very first thing you'll see is a place where you can download your human design cheat sheet centers. No, your human design centers cheat sheet. Wow, that's a mouthful. And you can download it and just have it for your reference. So that's a really good resource to go to just for quick and easy access. You could also print it off and you can even take notes next to it, either during this podcast or as you just are experimenting upon these things and what you personally learned about those specific centers. The throat, I feel like, is a little more self-explanatory. It is our communication and our expression center. So it's any way that somebody hears us. It's how we communicate to each other. It's our expression. We now are taking an idea from the head, which moved to the ajna, and we are expressing it through our throat, and therefore kind of manifesting it, kind of bringing it more onto a physical plane. So that's your throat. Then you have under that is your G center, and your G center is your identity center. So this is just this internal knowing of who you are. It is your sense of purpose and understanding of your place in the world is your G center. And then you have off to the right your heart. And I like to talk about your G center and your heart at the same time because they are like one with each other. It's like the G center and the heart actually make up the whole component of the heart. So we have our heart, which is another triangle off to the right, and it is your ego center or your willpower center. This is like your drive and your motivation and your self-worth is where you're going to feel that. From there, let's just move straight down to the solar plexus, which is your emotion center. It's all about your emotions. Pretty self-explanatory there. Anything that has to do with emotions is there. Then we have the sacral center, and this is the second square up from the very bottom square. The very bottom square is our root, and the sacral center is the next one up. The sacral center is your life force energy. It is the energy that makes the world go round. It's the energy that brings us life. I mean, if you kind of think about it, your sacral center is the creation center. If we're talking about chakras, it's there in like all of your creation organs. So like your uterus, that's where you're creating like a physical being, right? So that's your creation center. It is the energy of life is right there. Then you have your root, which is the very bottom square, and your root center is like your stress center. And another thing to keep in mind when it comes to the verbiage of human design is that the original creator, Ra Uru Hu, used words that I think are somewhat triggering in society today, but that's because there's a lot of baggage that goes along with those words. So when you see a word like a definition for a center or a gate or a channel, which we'll talk about later, when you see a definition for those and the word feels a little off-putting, just go back to the original definition, like go to the dictionary, look up the original definition for it, and it'll probably make more sense. So in this case, the root is about stress. It's your stress center. It's a motivational center. It's kind of like gives you a push. But stress in this way isn't like how we would think about stress as, oh, I'm so stressed. It's just a motivator. Our last center is the spleen center, and it is to the very left of, in between the sacral and the root center. Over to the left of that is our spleen center, and this is your intuition center, your instinct center. It's your survival center. It can be kind of confusing for me sometimes because there's an aspect of the spleen energy that is physical, where it's like your physical body, right? And then there's another aspect to the energy there that is your intuition, which I don't think of as necessarily a really physical thing. It's kind of an energetic thing. So you've got this intuitive survival center is your spleen. So now that you know the name of every center, you know basics, the very basic of what that energy is within those centers, and you know that your centers can be defined or undefined, let's talk about why these centers are significant for you and what it means for you to have it defined or undefined. So if you have an open center or an undefined center, which means it does not have any coloration within it, you are susceptible to conditioning. And the reason why you are susceptible to conditioning is because you're not necessarily feeling a constant and consistent energy that you are producing within yourself in that center. You actually can absorb and taste test everybody else's energy from that center, especially if somebody around you has that center defined. So for example, if your head is undefined, you will often have thoughts coming and going into your head that don't necessarily originate from you. They probably originate from your environment or from the people that are around you. If you have a defined head, your ideas are probably produced from you. And this can have pros and cons. If you have an undefined head, then a lot of times we'll walk into a room, right? Like let's say you walk into a room, there's a whole bunch of people there. Some people have defined heads, some people have undefined heads. And those that have defined heads, there's just a trillion ideas coming out from them. And when you're next to them, you're bringing in all of those ideas. Now, the risk here is that you can latch onto those ideas and think that you have to act on every single one and that those ideas are your ideas. The great thing about this is that you could see the perspective of everybody's ideas. Oh, yeah, I can see that. Oh, yeah, I can totally see that. If you have a defined head, you're just like a power box of ideas. You're just spitting out ideas all day long, but then you can sometimes be closed-minded, right? So if you have a defined head and a defined ajna, you might want to consider that, when we use that phrase hard-headedness, sometimes those two defined centers can manifest or express themselves as hard-headedness. You kind of have to keep an open perspective, right? And understand that you might only be able to see it one way, but that doesn't mean that there is only one way. So our open centers are places where we can be highly conditioned because we are influenced by everybody else's energy around us. An open center, though, becomes our wisdom centers. We can become really wise in those areas, and that is because we can sample everybody's energy, and so we have this broad perspective of it all. And so these become the areas that you are wise in and that you can teach in. If you have a defined center, that means that you're going to have a constant and consistent energy, which is really nice to have at times because I almost think of it as really peaceful. And I think maybe that's because I have so many undefined centers. So in the places where I do have defined centers, or if I'm around somebody who has a lot of defined centers, it just feels really steady and consistent and constant. Now, that's not to say that if your center is undefined, that you can't find consistency and peace in that area. But I think it's harder to unless you have an awareness of the openness in that area and an awareness of the conditioning that you have had in that area. So those are kind of the two energies that I have experienced personally, that I've seen other people experience, is open centers, wisdom, things coming in and out, flowing. It's kind of just, it can be volatile, right? And then a closed center is just consistently constant peace. I actually don't know if peace would be the way I should describe it. I think that's just how I personally describe it, because right now I am seeking after just a little more consistency, because in my mind that equals more peace in my life. I don't know, I need to still flush that out, but that's how I personally have felt it. So you have 9 different centers that could be defined or that could be undefined. And each one of those centers, whether they are defined or undefined, are going to influence how you feel energy, but then also how everybody around you feels your energy. All right, I can tell that this is going to go a lot longer than I thought it was going to, because we're this far in and we have only covered just the basics of centers. So I'm going to go ahead and take a break right now, and then I'm going to come back to you next week. Maybe we'll do a little mini series of the basics of knowing your human design chart, or being able to read your human design chart. So let's leave it there. That's a really good ending place, is understanding our centers. So I just want to back it up and just let's summarize it all, because I know that that is a lot of information to take in. Okay, so we have 9 energy centers, and each energy center holds a different energy. Starting from the top going down, you have your head, your ajna, your throat, your G center, your sacral, and your root, that's along the middle. Over to the right, you have your solar plexus, and above that, you have your heart. And then over to the left in your chart, you have your spleen. Now, each center can be defined or undefined, and that means that either they are colored in or they are not colored in. If they are not colored in, they are open or undefined. If they are colored in, then they are defined. All right, there's your crash course on the energy centers on your human design chart. Hopefully you have it printed off. Take note of what are your defined or undefined centers. Especially look for your open centers, your undefined centers, because you can use those as a starting point for your healing journey. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Soul Script podcast. Our next week's episode will be a continuation of these basics of learning how to read your human design chart. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration. Your support makes a world of difference. Until next time, keep rewriting and reigniting your story.